How y'all doing? This is Kevin Lewis on the Blueprint. And first, I want to say Ramadan Mubarak to all my Muslim brothers and sisters out there um, during Ramadan. And today's or this week's show is called Problems and Solutions. So I'm ready for this show. It's kind of a lineage or a link to last week's show. So some of the things I spoke about last week, this is it's going to carry over to this week. So I hope I'm not too repetitive. But anyway, let me get started. Problems and solutions. See, when you have a problem, the answer to that problem is having a solution. And if you don't have a solution, the problem will persist. And that's what our problem is in America. We as black people and minorities, this is what our problem is. We don't have the correct solutions to rectify the problems that we have. And before you can correctly rectify your problems, you have to identify your problem. And if you misidentify your problem, then your solutions won't work. So let's identify the problems. But first, let's get into some of the problems that America has shown us with its history. And if you go back to when the Europeans first came to this country, they had a problem. And they came up with a solution to that problem. The Native Americans that was here, the South Americans that was here, the Mexican Central Americans that was here, when the European invasion came to their doorsteps, they had a problem. They just didn't recognize the problem when it first came. Now, the Europeans' problem was they had problems going on at home in Europe. They were looking for wealth. They were looking for land. And they found the solution to their problem. But the problem that they had once they got here was this land was inhabited. They looked around, they saw what they wanted. The problem is, you know, for me to get this, we have to solve this problem of these people that's here. So they solved their problem. And we know what happened once the invasion happened, all throughout the Americas. The Europeans went back and got what they needed to solve the problem that they had. They wanted the land, they wanted the riches of the land, but there was a people there that was causing a problem for them. So the extermination became the problem for the Native Americans, the solution to the Europeans that came. Now, when those same Europeans, or when the Europeans came into Africa, the Africans had a problem. They just didn't know there was going to be a problem. So they didn't come up with a solution. They didn't have a plan, just in case these people that was coming here, coming to their land, acting friendly with them, they wasn't prepared. Just in case. The same thing with the Native Americans. The Native Americans welcomed them to the Americas. And like they say, the rest is history. See, the Europeans, they needed a labor force. They saw an opportunity. They took advantage of an opportunity. And that became our problem as a people. Here in America, we became the diasporas. And we haven't solved that problem yet. We thought we were solving problems by gaining freedom through the Civil War, but that didn't solve our problems. Because we didn't correctly identify what our problems was. So that's what we're going to talk about, identifying our problems and why we're still having these problems today that we had after the Civil War. I'd like to thank Teresa for joining. I'd like to thank Leah Howard for joining and Dee Dee for joining. Welcome to the Blueprint. Problems and solutions. Now, like I said, all of our problems came from or stem from the European invasion. 1526, I believe, the first slaves were here in this country. Now, for the 300 years 283 years, 285 years that slavery existed in this country, we were seeking our freedom. What's up, Isha? I appreciate you showing up to the blueprint. Once we gained that freedom, the Civil War was fought for 4 years in this country. And part of our problem is the history that we're learning. We're learning an incorrect history, or we're learning an adaptation of history. And a lot of us think that the North did us a favor by declaring war on the South to free the slaves. Now, we have a lot of these Negroes that say, well, that wasn't what the Civil War was about. And we always tend to have those type of people, which I'm going to get back to that a little later. But we always had those people. But anyway, make no mistake about it, the Civil War was over slavery. And I'm going to tell you why it was over slavery. See, the North had a problem. The problem that the North didn't have slaves, our interest in mind. They had their own interest in mind. So in a way, some of those people that say, well, it wasn't really about slavery, in a way they're correct, but it's more complex than that. And we're going to talk about that. See, the North had a problem. Slavery was from 1861 to, I believe, 1865. The Civil War is from 1861 to 1865. So let's look back at that time frame, the North and the South. What was the difference between the North and the South when we came to the slaves? The North was becoming more industrial. The South was more agricultural. They had plantations. And if you look at the difference in the North and South today, the climates are different. The geography is different. The South is more spread out. They have warmer climates. For the North, they were getting away from having slaves. You have to take care of those slaves. You have to take care of them during the harsh winters, the longer winters. You didn't have the big plots of land and the farms and plantations like you had in the South. The North became more progressive, more industrialized, started opening plants. They were doing things, thinking in that way. The South is still more agricultural. The South was more spread out. So if you go right before the Civil War started, let's go to 1860. And America at this time was becoming a superpower because of slavery, because of the cotton. The cotton became pertinent around the world. That was an important thing around the world. They used to have to do things with silkworm, silkworms and things like that. Those things took a long time to make clothes. Cotton was a plant that launched America into being a superpower. And if we look at America at that time, if we go to 1860, 1 year before the Civil War, 2/3 of the wealthiest Americans in this country was from the South. 2 out of every 3 of the richest people in the country was from the South. That was a problem for the North because the South had more slaves. They had the most slaves. The North had given up basically on having slaves. 80% of the national gross product in America was stemming from slavery. 80% of the national gross product in this country in 1860 had ties to slavery. The South was becoming powerful. This is what the North's problem was. So in order to take that problem away, they knew what the issue was. What was giving the South problem was having this labor, having this free labor in this agricultural field. So to solve this problem, they needed to neutralize the South's money economic power. After all, this is capitalism. Money is power. So what Lincoln did, he went about trying to free the slaves. But see, what we think and what we learned that Lincoln was this good guy and he was freeing the slaves, like as if he cared about us. But that isn't the problem. And this is what part of the problem is today. And if we translate it to today, you're going to see what I'm saying. Why are we still having the same issues? Because see, Lincoln didn't care about our well-being. He cared about the country's well-being. And in fact, in 1854, Lincoln gave a speech in Peoria, Illinois, about what they were going to do with these slaves if they released them, or if they freed them. And many of us hadn't learned in school, or wasn't taught in school, that Lincoln had plans, America had plans, the North had plans for these slaves that they were going to try to release. In Peoria, Illinois, he gave a speech, Lincoln. And of course, you don't just say, well, we're going to free the slaves. You have to have some idea, because those people didn't want slaves. If they freed them, where they going to go? What they going to do? You going to free them, they not going to stay here. So he said, nah, we're gonna set up a plan. We're going to send them to Liberia. That's the plan. We're going to send them to Liberia. And if you look up Lincoln's speech in 1854 in Illinois, this is what he said. This is what his plan was. 1854. Civil War is in 1861. But then the South, of course, was like, nah, this is our money, our money horse. We're not giving up slavery. So all those Negroes that sit there and say, well, it was over, it wasn't over slavery. That was the foundation. And if you look at some of the secessions articles that states like Mississippi and Arkansas had, they said it. They said, nah, we ain't giving up our slaves. This is our money horse. This is our goose, that gives us the golden eggs. So that's when this war raged. But many of us believed that the North was the good guys. Now, many of us did. Of course, when you given the lesser, I guess that's the thing we say, the lesser of two evils. It benefited us for them to end slavery. And the brutality that was happening in the South. But a lot of those brutalities was happening in the North. If you look at the New York City, and I'm trying to think of the name of it. The draft riots in New York City. They were lynching black people in the city on lampposts, torturing them. Lynch mob mentality, and that's what one thing I want to talk about, the lynch mob mentality. I'm gonna come back to that. This was things that was happening up north, because what was happening, they were gonna fight this war. And they needed people. And some people was like, man, I don't want to fight no war. I don't care. The common people didn't care about the power being in the South. That's political. Those were rich people issues. And then they saw when the draft came, they were drafting people because people wasn't volunteering. What I'm gonna go fight about some slaves for? When they started drafting people, them people were upset. They didn't want to go to war. And they looked for a scapegoat. Or the reason that all this was happening. The black people, the slaves, the ex-slaves that was around them. They sought them out. They were mad at the powers that be for trying to draft them, because if you're rich, you didn't have to go to war, just like today. So they were mad at them, and they were mad at us. And they started lynching us, torturing us, burning us alive. This was happening in the North. So we can't be under the impression that the North was looking out for our best interests. They didn't care about us one way or another. This was America at that time. This is what we're not taught in school, and things that we haven't learned today. So the war was fought, going on. We had 100. We almost had 200,000 African Americans or diaspora blacks fighting for the Union, the North. We had about 180,000 soldiers, and we had about 19,000 naval seamen. So we had almost 200,000. Like, we was fighting for that. They were fighting for the ones that they wanted their people to be free. But they misidentified the problem. Once that, see, Lincoln knew, America knew. Lincoln then came up. He met with 5 prominent African Americans, invited them to the White House. I believe this was in April 1862. Who he elected there. You gonna represent the black people. Y'all 5 people. Y'all gonna represent the black people. And he came up with the D.C. Emancipation Act. They set money aside. The government was setting money aside to send the freed, the soon to be freed Africans that was in America, the slaves. When we free y'all, when we free them, we're going to send them to Panama, which was Iroquois at that time, Providence and Panama. They were going to ship us off to Panama. That was the idea. It left from being Liberia, then it switched to being Panama. The government was setting money aside to solve a problem that they were going to have if they freed these slaves. See, we became a problem. But those 5 African, or those 5 blacks that they had meet with Lincoln, they was like, nah, we ain't going to no Panama. I don't even know what Panama is. So that was a problem. They had 3 different locations that they wanted to ship us off to. They wanted to ship us to Haiti. They wanted to set up a colony to ship us to Haiti. And what I'm getting at is, see, they didn't want us here with them. They wanted us free. They wanted to free us from the South, to take away their power, their economic power, because they feared that the capital and everything was going to be moved to the South. But they had no intentions of living amongst us and having us around them. Lincoln said, when he talked to those 5 representatives, let's be honest. We are not equal. Our people are different. We are 2 different people. And we can't even live amongst each other. I want to thank RC for showing up. Appreciate you showing up to the blueprint. Problems and solutions. So this was the problem that America was looking at when we were being freed. They didn't want to integrate. That's why everything was segregated. That's why the Jim Crow laws came in effect. They didn't see us as equal. They just wanted us free from them. That's a problem that we haven't recognized to this day. They came up with the Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees. The Bureau of Refugees, of Freedmen, and Abandoned Land in 1865. Right when the Civil War was ending. Remember I said the Civil War is from 1861 to 1865. And for short, they call it the Freedmen Bureau. This is where the 40 acres and a mule come from. That people say we was promised. But I understand when you saying that 40 acres and a mule, what that was about. They came up with this Freedmen Bureau to give us 40 acres and a mule in a land that was not wanted somewhere in America. They're like, we're going to give them 40 acres so they could be separated from us. That's what the purpose of that was. Not to be 40 acres. Hey, I'm 40 acres right here. I got my acres, and right next to me is a farm For Mr. Thompson used to be a plantation on no. They didn't want us around them. It was going to be like giving, like they did with the Native Americans with the plantations. They gave them a plantation. They didn't want them to integrate or be around them. They figured that they was different. So those 40 acres in the mule that we always talk about or was promised by the Freedmen Bureau, that's what that was for. That was the purpose. Now, it didn't come to fruition. It never came to be, but that's what the purpose of it was. Right after the Civil War ended, they came up with the Freedmen Bureau. So that we won't be around them. We was a problem. They was trying to look for a solution. That never happened. They start seeing this land as being, America started venturing off to the west. They start finding gold and things like that. And it was like, man, this is good property here. We're not giving them anything. So we started being, now the South was bitter. They lost the war. They was bitter. And I believe in South Carolina, it's like 90% of their revenue was coming from slavery. And that was taken away. So they were bitter. The South was bitter. Here you had the government in the North telling them how to make a living. So it was a backlash. Yeah, we could free y'all, but y'all gonna pay for it. The KKK came about in 1865, right when the Civil War ended. And what was the purpose? What was the reason for the KKK? Last week's show was about the purpose, looking at the purpose of things. What was the purpose of the KKK? To preserve their way of life. Who was there? The whites in America. White supremacy. That was there, and it's to preserve their way of life. Now, if you look at what's happening today, those things still stand today. And the reason it stands is not because everybody's in the KKK. It's because they are trying to preserve a way. It's a mob mentality that's going on. So that's what happened with the freedom that we achieved in this country. There was resentment in the South. It's still a resentment for us all over this country because they wanted us someplace else. They wanted to put money aside to ship us someplace else. They didn't want us with them. We were free but not equal. Segregation was their solution. You could be here, but just don't be around us. Y'all can't move in our neighborhoods. Y'all can't go to our schools. I mean, the history speaks for itself. It almost seems like it's a contradiction because you're hearing all these things about land of the free. But we weren't free. Everyone is created equal, every man, but we weren't considered men, not fully human. Thomas Jefferson, he owned 600 slaves in his lifetime. 200 at one time. He raped his slaves. He had children with a young slave girl. Continually had children with her. I believe her last name was Henson. And they did a DNA test in the 1990s. And they found out that her descendants were indeed, they were his children. But he said, this brutal slave master, because he was brutal, he also said that he feared that God was going to punish America for his crimes during slavery. See, some people saw it as brutality, and that's what they didn't like about slavery. I'm not saying that was him, but I'm saying some people in America, some of the white people in America, they saw it as brutal. They saw it as wicked, the way the treatment, They didn't see slavery as that. They just saw the way they was treating us as that. Some of them tried to do something about it. Some of them didn't. But Thomas Jefferson, he said he feared that America would pay for that sin if God is just. If justice is being served by God, that God will punish America. Now, you can't have justice without equality. You know, an eye for an eye. That means if I lose my eye on your account, then you need to lose an eye. That's equal. Or justice with the law is if there's a law for murder, then if I committed a murder, justice is me serving the time that's put aside for murderers. But if you don't equally do the same thing for somebody else, then there's no justice. That's not equality. And this is something that we need to learn, that we are not equal in this country. Many of us already know that. But that's a problem that we had. Like Stokely Carmichael said, they have the power. Then that's my problem. So what's the solution? If they want to lynch me, then that's their problem. If they have the power to lynch me, then that's my problem. So now we got to find a solution. Because they've had the power to lynch us. And the lynching started right after the Civil War. The lynching started with the KKK, 1865. And it hasn't stopped. That's our problem. And we need to find solutions. And many of us will sit up and we'll complain and, you know, this is happening, but this is happening. But see, the problem is we're not looking for solutions. We need solutions to this problem. We need solutions today for this problem that's been going on for the last 100 or so years. Over 100 years. 150 years. We got to find a solution. We need to find a proper solution to the problems that we have. Because they have the power and they are lynching us. They are lynching us in our own homes. They are lynching us going in their neighborhoods, looking in vacant houses or houses being built. They are lynching us constantly. So we have a problem. We need to come up with solutions, viable solutions. Now, what's happening with this lynch mob mentality? What happened after slavery? We start having the Jim Crow era. We had the KKK come about. We start having all these lynchings, all this retaliation in the North and the South. You know, they had over 600,000 casualties in the South. Well over 1 million people died in the Civil War, North and South. And we had soldiers coming home, sons and husbands coming home, missing limbs, unable to make a living. There was no, government GI funding or anything like that. There was no veterans pay or nothing like that. You came home fighting a war for people that you really didn't see as your equal. You didn't really care 2 cents about. They were the culprit. They became the scapegoat. However you felt before the war, some of them felt the same, but now you coming back in a dilapidated state. The women coming, bringing their sons home like that, or in a box. They didn't hate the South. They hated the reason that the war was fought. In their eyes, they hated you. The hate festered. The hate is still festering. Passed down from generation to generation. But right after Civil War, things became brutal for us. We had a problem. We probably didn't have a way to solve it. I didn't know how to solve it. And all we knew was that it was better than slavery. What we was going through in slavery. So we stayed in our small towns, our side of the tracks, everything that we needed to do to try to survive. But those incidents were still happening. We were still being lynched. We're still being lynched today. We were lynched in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. We're lynched today. That's our problem. They have the power to lynch us. Because see what the KKK came up with. All these laws being passed, they changed their solutions. They went from just being a professional here when they started integrating. See, the whole problem with the North and the South, let me go back to that. It's like a parent. The country didn't really give a damn about our well-being, because if they actually gave a damn about our well-being, then all this stuff wouldn't be happening today. It's like a parent that gives a house rule. You will segregate your schools. Then you got the South that's saying, nah, we won't. It's like a child. America's the parent, the North is one child, the South is the other child, and the North is complying and the South is being stubborn and saying, no, I won't. The North is looking on. When you're a parent and you have your kids at your house and you say everybody better be in this house by 9 o'clock, and you got one child strolling in at 9:30, the other child is watching. This is challenging your authority. That's the only issues that this government had with the South, with the Jim Crow era. The government was passing laws, but they wasn't really enforcing them like that. If they really wanted the lynching to stop, the lynching would have stopped. But see, America is founded on white supremacy. And we have to recognize what's before us, even today. Because see, you have part of a lynch mob, and you have a mob mentality that's happening in this country, and it's always been happening in this country. And if you look at what a mob mentality is, sometimes they call it a herd mentality, gang mentality, the pack mentality. But it's mainly called the herd mentality or the mob mentality. And what that is, that's when a crowd of people kill or try to kill someone illegally as a punishment. That's what a mob is. But the mentality of the mob, that's what lynch mob is. But the mob mentality is when those people, or it's the way people are influenced by their peers, and they adopt a certain behaviors and stop thinking in a rational manner. They start thinking more emotional rather than rational. And this mob mentality is something that psychologists know about, the country knows about, and this is what they use to promote things. Merchandise. Make us think that this is the best merchandise to have. Fashion. Superstitions. Things like that. That comes from the herd mentality. Because if everybody see everyone else doing it, then this must be the thing to do. You see it in their commercials. Everybody's drinking this type of beer. This is the beer that all the girls like, the women like. This will get you all the men. This is what get you all the women if you do this. This is what successful people do. This is what successful people drink. This is what the star athletes drink. Everybody is doing this. 9 out of 10 people like this. So you must like it or you're going to be an eyeball. That's the herd mentality. This is how a lot of things fester in this country. This is how the lynch mobs had success. People stopped thinking in a rational manner. They put stereotypes on people. Part of reasoning, what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago, when I talk about reason, the levels of reasoning, one of them is labeling. They label a people a certain way. This is what happened when the KKK was formed. They said black people was this. Black people was a danger. Black people was a threat. Birth of a Nation. That's what that movie was talking about. The first birth of a nation. These black slaves that was going to be released, they're going to wreak havoc in this country. They after our women. They're going to steal our, catch them in our chicken coops and things like that. That's all they know how to do. They're a threat. They the boogeyman. And we have to identify the problem that we have, because part of the issue that we have is we confuse racism with bigotry. And I always say we have to be able to identify the difference between a racist and a bigot. See, the bigot is the one that hates you. The bigot is the one that leads the crowd, that does those heinous acts. Some of those people in the crowd, they may be racist. You racist if you allow that stuff to go on. You racist if you just believe that you are different and your differences are better than me, that I am not your equal. This system doesn't treat us equally. And the problem with us confusing a racist and a bigot, because see, some people could be racist and don't even know that they're racist. And they'll say, well, I don't hate black people. Well, the hatred is the bigotry. But you support them. You're part of that lynch mob. America has a lynch mob mentality for us. They have a mob mentality that's out to lynch us, or making it okay to lynch us. Like Desmond Tutu said, you can't be neutral. If you're neutral, then you're taking the side of the oppressor. See, all those people that's not against the racism and the bigotry, they're for it. They're causing part of the problem. And that's part of our problem. I'd like to thank Desiree for showing up. I'm going to read a comment from Robert. He said they do things in large groups that they wouldn't do alone. And that's true. That's what the biggest do. That's what the biggest do. A lot of them, they get away with it. They don't have to have large groups anymore. I appreciate those comments, RC. And that's true. That's what they mainly would do. Or if they have an advantage. Because if they don't need the large group if they have a gun and you don't. See, they don't need that. Now, when there's 2 of you and there's 5 of them, then yeah, people get they get their chest out. But if it's 2 of you and they had a gun, then they still have the advantage. And anytime what they doing, they seeking an advantage. But part of their advantage is those people that remain neutral. I made a comment, the anniversary of the MOVE bombing here in America was this past week. And I made a post. And I just said, America, Philadelphia, they bombed the MOVE movement in 1985. Where they dropped incineraries in a community in Philadelphia. And they started rattling the structures, the homes with bullets. The people were trying to surrender. I remember it well. But then a guy that I know that I used to work with, he came on and he made comments about the founder of the MOVE movement. He's like, yeah, but, John Africa, he was insane, he was crazy and blah, blah, blah. And this is the problem. This is part of that lynch mob mentality. This is part of the lynch mob mentality that festers in this country today. When they start adding that but to anything, you could say but blah, blah, blah. It then come back and say, but the police were wrong for doing it. Then why did you have to add a but to the situation or a well? See, this is what enables Zimmerman to get off. This is what enables things to happen in this country. Yeah, but that's part of the mob that's not thinking in a rational manner. That's part of the mob that sat there when it was a lynch mob. They wasn't the ones hanging Mary Turner up while she was pregnant. They not the one that took the knife and slit her stomach and let the infant can't come out while they was burning her alive. They're not the ones that was pouring the tar over her and lighting her up. They're not the one that stomped that infant's head in or that baby's head in when it was screaming on the ground. They're the ones that sat back and cheered when it happened. Or some of the ones that sat there and said, man, that was wrong, but you didn't do anything about it. You went back and kissed your kids at night. Good night. And went on his life as usual because you said, well, but it was bad, but, well, whatever reason that they made up for killing her, which was saying that her husband probably killed this plantation owner, which they didn't know who did it, so they just went out and started lynching and killing all the blacks they could find. And she spoke out when they found her husband. Finally found him and took him back and lynched him. And she said she was going to press charges, that this was wrong, so they got her. And what was the mentality? Part of those mob, the lynch mob mentality. They went along with everything. They went along with the Jim Crow laws. They said, well, she can't talk back to authority. They authority. Well, you know how it is. So when I had the guy say something about John Africa, I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with them being bombed and burned? If they're not out doing anything to somebody else. He said, well, they were terrorists, but you can't tell me of any terrorist act that they committed. Except a standoff. And then you're looking at the media, the same media that's saying, they need to get the Black Panthers, that the Black Panthers was terrorists, but you can't tell me any terrorist act that they committed. The government, the FBI that's after Assata Shakur because they had different viewpoints. It didn't think the same way you thought or tried to stand up for their freedoms. They blackball you, they alienate it, and this is things that we see time and time again. They're going to label you radical, insane, a terrorist, a threat. And you're not harming anybody, but you're a threat to their ideology. This is what enables the things for us to be continually lynched in this country. Part of that lynch mob. You have the bigots that's doing it. And the racists that's standing by watching. And they're racist because they're part of this systemic racist system. They're supporting this systemic racist system. And they may say, I don't have a hatred of you, but how many of us has lost friends over the last 3 or 4 years? 5 years, 6 years over the Trayvon thing when they made comments, over the Tamir Rice thing when they made comments. And you see that they didn't care as much as you cared. How many of us has lost friends people that we thought were our friends over the whole Trump situation? That's our problem because we were thinking that these people actually cared about us. Like we were thinking the North actually cared about the slaves. That's our problem. We have to identify our problem and identify the fact that we have a problem. And all of those culprits, all of those people that's part of this mob, that's allowing these things to happen, all those people that's part of the mob, the lynch mob mentality. Now, I know it's called a mob mentality, but I'm calling it a lynch mob mentality when it comes to us. They sit back and watch the lynchings happen, and they'll shake their head and say it's wrong, but they won't do anything about it. But they will sit on the jury and say, yeah, but Tamir Rice, he did have a Instagram photo of him smoking weed. Yeah, Mike Brown, he wasn't this angel. Why the hell do we have to be angels? Why do we have to be perfect model citizens for us to get justice in this country? That's part of the racism. Anytime anybody talks about black on black crime, yeah, this is happening, but y'all need to clean up the crime in y'all neighborhood. I thought that was the damn police force job. Those people are part of our problem that we have. RC said all the group needs is to get going is a strong instigator to incite the crowd. And this is what they know. And this is what was happening in Ferguson. I don't know if some of us remember, but they had undercover cops posing as just regular civilians that was inciting. Now, people was already, protesting, but they weren't looting. Because, see, when they start looting, then that takes it to another level. So what was happening is the people that was in the crowd. And what happens with the mob mentality and the herd mentality? You ever be on the highway or something and the traffic is just sitting there? And you say, you know what? And you see some people drive off to the access road. Now they drive off into the grass and stuff. And they're not supposed to do that. That's actually illegal. But you see one person do it, then the next person does it, then the next person does it. And you're like, man, shoot, everybody else doing it. I'm about to do it. That's the herd mentality. That's what that is. When you stop thinking rationally, and this is something we get on our kids about. Why did you do that? Everybody else was doing it. I don't care, blah, blah, blah. But then we do that too. That's something that's psychological. And that's part of the mob mentality, the pack mentality. You stop thinking rationally. And this is what's happening in America. Some of these people they're not thinking rationally. They're not looking at Ahmaud Arbery's case and saying, well, look, here's a picture of him going in the house. Okay. But what I know, okay, he wasn't jogging. Okay. But what I do know is that two men chased him down and shot him, and he was unarmed. That's as rational as I need to get. Then we got some of these black people that want to come out and say, well, it wasn't racial. How the hell do you know? How the hell do you know whether it was racial or not? See, we're quick. Some of us are part of the problem. We want to diffuse it. Well, it's not a racial situation. How the hell do you know? Have they gone to trial yet? Do you know these people's background? Do you even know what was said between them? And I feel like this. 9 times out of 10, when there's an issue between two different races, race plays a part. I'm going to venture to say that. Even when it's black people killing black people, race plays a part. And this is why I'm going to say that. In either case, 9 times out of 10. Because see, in this country, one life is held in more value than the other. It's seen in the law, seen in law enforcement. If Ahmaud Arbery was a white person coming out of a home, a dwelling, and those McMichaels saw him, they would have thought, well, maybe he's, part of their family. Or maybe he's coming, one of the construction workers coming to, they would have thought all kind of things. But as soon as they saw a black person, things change. So then race would play a part. Or would have played a part. Because as soon as they saw you black, they felt that you didn't belong there. Or that you were up to no good. Now, adding a twist to that, when I said black on black, a lot of times we have been brainwashed to the point that we don't value each other's life. An incident will happen, and if it's a black person, we're quick to seek retribution, to exact revenge. And a lot of times you say, you know what? If that was a white person, would you have done that? A lot of times what happens is we sit back and complain. And I'll tell you, I'll give you another instance of why I say even with black on black, or anytime it's different regardless. Because see, a black person could say, you blah, 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 and say, call you a nigga. Why they fussing at you? But a white person does that, it's going to hold a whole different weight. And you're going to go into attack mode because there's a difference. It's always going to be a difference. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a difference. We treat people differently with circumstances. I always come out and I say, you know, you could use a substitute postulate. You know, to say, well, if you take this person, if that person was black, like I did with the Arbery incident, if he was a white person, would he be dead? If Sandra Bland was a white person, would she be dead? If Tamir Rice was a white kid, would he be dead? 9 times out of 10, the answer going to be no, he wouldn't be. And that's a substitution postulate. That shows that there's no equality. Now, you could do that with a situation, but that doesn't work when you're talking about the mentality or what somebody would do. And I'm going to tell you why. Because we have a different history in this country. We have a different history of what we dealt with in this country. So when I sit up here and I listen to a black police officer talk about the Ahmaud Arbery case, and they say, well, he's trying to break down. Well, see, any rational person wouldn't have did this. Well, you know what? What's rational to you and what's rational to me is 2 different things. I have a friend, and we talk about coming up in the hood on the east side. And he was telling me one time he went back to the hood to see some of the guys, and they're older. You know, he was older at the time. You know, he went back, they like older teens, 19, 20, whatever years old. And police came up, and them guys said, the police, and they started running. He said, well, why are we running? Well, I ain't did nothing wrong. But that's what they used to do. And somebody not growing up in the hood wouldn't understand that. Because they'll say, well, if you didn't do anything wrong, why would you run it? Because see, a lot of times the police used to stop us. And they'd go through our pockets and do all these things. We ain't doing anything wrong. What y'all up to? What you doing? Blah, blah, blah. See, this is something that you're not used to. So when you're not used to that type of environment, then you won't understand what I've been through. So you can't substitute what you would do into things that I would do. That's when that substitution postulate won't work. You could do it for a situation, but you can't do it for a behavior, a learned behavior. Because we're in 2 different Americas. You're in white America, you're in black America. This is part of the problem that we have when we got people on the jury. That's part of that lynch mob mentality that sit there and watch things happen and don't have the same reaction because they don't see us as equal. That's white superiority. That's white supremacy. You know, they'd be like, well, come on now, what was he doing? Blah, blah, blah. Why was he here? And you may not hate brown people or black people or Asian people, but you don't see them on your level. Or you think there's a reasoning behind it. Or you have already labeled them. He's probably up to no good. You know, we see people do that all the time. Grab their purses a certain way or feel uncomfortable when they see a black person or brown person walking down the street. Because you already labeled us. You already have something in mind. Zimmerman already had this in mind when he saw Trayvon. He must be up to no good. These people always think they could get away. That's the abstraction. You already labeled. You already identified that person as a problem. Ahmaud Arbery was already a problem. They identified him as a problem. So they had a solution. The same type of solution that the KKK has. They see us as a problem. They had to come up with a solution. They had to keep us separated. They have to keep us out their neighborhoods. And when you have a lynch mob, what you do, like what I said, the definition of the lynch mob is illegally. See that, and if you look at any of the lynchings that goes on in this country, and it's a book, Ida B. Wells has about lynching, and she has all these articles and all these where they go into details, and people are talking about some of these people that was part of the lynch mob or that was there. They gave an eyewitness about what happened in some of these lynch mobs. Sometimes a person could be arrested, a black person to be arrested, and a lynch mob would go up to the sheriff's office and say, hey, we're coming to get this guy. He ain't about to stand trial. He's already guilty. And this is what the lynch mob would do. Sometimes the sheriff have no choice but to give him over, and they have lynch him. And that's what happens in society today. Even though Zimmerman was told by the 911 dispatcher, stand down. Nah, even if the police come and they arrest him, they probably gonna end up letting him go because he haven't done what he already came here to do. He hasn't done it yet. But I'm gonna take things into my own hands illegally. But because we have the mob mentality and we have those people that sit back and watch things and they say, but they're giving him the benefit of the doubt. What was you expecting him to do? He was trying to look out, and the guy probably attacked him. Well, that's what he said. He's the only one there that could speak. That's those but people that's part of the lynch mob. The people that's not the bigots, but the ones that's enabling the bigots to do what they're doing. I'd like to thank Karen for showing up. I'm going to read a comment from Teresa. She said, we are definitely the focus and the target of people plotting our demise. The thing that I see that goes back to the time of slavery is that we are resilient. All the efforts put forth to destroy us would have easily destroyed other races. We are a formidable adversary because we continue to be relevant despite all that comes our way. And I appreciate those comments. But yet we still got to find a solution. It's good to be resilient. I'm gonna tell you something. I'm gonna say something that I like boxing. And Andre Ward, who was like a lightweight champion, black brother, he's a boxer. And what they have on HBO, what they started doing, they started interviewing the fighters with Max Kellerman. He's like an announcer. And he would have both fighters sitting at the table. He'd have Floyd Mayweather and Pacquiao, and they talking before the fight, about what's going to happen or how he feels about this and that. He just interviews them. They had Andre Ward. He was about to fight an opponent. And the guy was like, man, you can't even take a punch. I hit hard and all this stuff like this, and you got a glass chin. And Andre Ward said, well, you know what? My job is to make sure nobody know whether I got a hard, or, I got a iron chin or not. He said, when they finding out whether you got a hard chin or you could take a punch, it's because you taking punches. And he said, my job, I'm a boxer. I ain't trying to be showing nobody whether my chin is good or not. You don't want to show people that you're resilient. That's good to be resilient and to have been resilient. But our resiliency is showing bodies. Our resiliency is putting bodies in the graveyard. Tamir Rice's mother has to be strong because she lost her son. Mike Brown's mother has to be strong because she lost her son. I don't want anybody that I know to have to be strong or to show how strong they are for losing their sons. I don't want that. We need to find a solution so we don't have to get that. And part of our problem is people not identifying the problem and thinking the solutions are something that they're not. I said on many occasions, a lot of us are the problem. A lot of us are the problem. You can look at anybody that you know that's complaining. You know, we got something else called a scapegoat mentality. You know, that's where you want to blame somebody else for things that you're going through. And there is some people to blame. But okay, you blaming them. What are you going to do about it? That's the whole thing. What's your solution? You identified the problem. Somebody else is the reason that you don't have a job, or somebody else is the reason that you behind bars, or somebody else they didn't do something right. Whatever your excuse is, that's the scapegoat. You look, yeah, this is a scapegoat. Trump is a scapegoat. So what you gonna do about it? Well, we're gonna vote him out. The problem is, see, you got to go back to the problem. Our problem with that is, there's a whole lot of people that's behind Trump. There's a whole lot of people that's behind Trump. You could take him out of office, but those people, part of our problem is those people that's behind him, they're the ones that's doing the hiring. They're the ones that's in the police force. They're the ones that's part of the lynch mob. That lynch mob is not going to disperse. It's not going to disperse. They're not going to just have a change of heart. They're in power positions. Owners that's keeping Kaepernick from playing. People in the police force that's quick to try to gun us down. That's brutally, choking us and things like that while we're in handcuffs. That's pounding on us even though we're not doing anything. All the videos that we seen that's pulling us over for minor incidents. That's pulling up, firing shots at a 12-year-old kid. And then hesitant when it's a white assailant with a gun, fussing and cussing at them, and they not obeying commands. Those people are still going to be there doing the same damn thing. Trump is a minor problem. That's a feel-good problem to say, well, I voted him out. Yeah, I feel good. Look at him. He's soaking now. Yeah, and I understand that. But that's not our problem. That's a minor problem. We got a major problem that's been going on for a long time that we need to correct, that we need to focus on. I have no problem with people talking about Trump, but part of the problem, half of these people that's talking about Trump, you supporting the businesses that support Trump. So you half-ass going about, you just disliking him. You're not even putting your best foot forward to do something about him. You're not trying to take away his power. That's part of our problem. We focusing on that. We could take care of that in November. That's no problem. But I guarantee you, we could have Trump out of office in November. By December, it's going to be somebody else being shot in their house where the police got the wrong house. And it's not anything that's going to be done about it. We're not going to get justice from that. I guarantee you it's going to be somebody else that get pulled over and not given the benefit of a doubt. They're just going to open fire on them. I guarantee you. December, January, February, it's going to be the same incidences that's going to keep happening. We got to focus on solutions, real solutions to our problems. Trump is an American problem. We just don't like him. He's America. He wouldn't be there if he wasn't. We'll sit up here and fight amongst each other if he win a re-election. Well, who didn't go to vote? We make up 12% of the population. It's a democracy. If all black people that could vote voted against Trump and he still won, that's because most of the white people still wanted him in office. And we're going to be sitting up there witch hunting on with people that didn't vote. 1 or 2 votes here, 1 or 200 people here. You have half of the people, half of the country is backing him. And they're backing him no matter what. That's our problem, because those are the people. We don't own things like they own things. We still going to them for jobs. They're still part of the police force. That's our problem. We need solutions. We got to start coming up with solutions. Teresa said in the art of war is where we find solutions. Know your opponent. Our opponents love power. They love money. They love control. And I appreciate those comments. And that's what we need. We need to identify a way to take away their power over us. They're going to have power in this country. But we got to start identifying ways to take away their control and their ability to lynch us. And like I said, the scapegoats, they're always going to look. Obama is Trump's scapegoat. And the lynch mob mentality, the mob mentality, is all his followers going to agree with that. They're going to not think reasonably and talk about emotions, how they feel about. Emotionally, they don't like Obama. But they're not thinking rationally because they need a scapegoat for what's going on. And anytime they're out to lynch us, many of them are sitting back watching. You're enabling this white supremacist system, this systemic racism to fester, with the bigots out there being able to do what they want to do. That's why we still have a problem. And I appreciate everyone that showed up this week. Hopefully I have a better show for y'all next week. It's Kevin Lewis on the Blueprint. Peace.